What's up, Packer fans? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Of course, you can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Great show lined up for you today. I want to start where else than by talking about the Aaron Rodgers, Mark Murphy situation. Aaron Nagler just complimented me on Twitter yesterday for doing Cole Van Lanen topics and not discussing Mark Murphy while everyone else was, breaking down and discussing everything. Well, I'm sorry, Aaron, but it does seem to be a little bit of a pressing topic. So I do need to weigh in a little bit. It's not going to be the entire discussion today, but I do want to touch base on it because I think it's noteworthy. I think it's definitely something that we need to discuss and go over because I don't get it. All right. What are we possibly doing here? Now, for those who are unaware, it was quoted that Mark Murphy in a gathering, it was said that Aaron Rodgers was, quote, a complicated fella. And on the surface, it sounds so stupid and so ridiculous, right? Like, who in the heck possibly cares if somebody called somebody like, this is what this situation has degraded down into, that we are discussing Mark Murphy calling Aaron Rodgers a complicated fella. What? I don't even know what to say about that. A complicated fella? Are we in the 50s, first of all? And I know he was quoting, like, using a term that Ted Thompson used in the past. I understand that. But what is possibly to gain here by going up on a stage and talking about Aaron Rodgers and talking about him as a, quote, complicated fella? I don't get that. What does that possibly accomplish? And the number one thing I want to say here is, well, one, is he a complicated fella? Probably. Aaron Rodgers is a very complex individual. I think that would be a better way to term it. Aaron Rodgers is a very complex individual. And I think if you say that, and I think that's what he was ultimately trying to mean, first of all, don't say anything. But if you do, if you say, yeah, he's very complex and this is a complex situation, cool. No other words needed. You're right. That's not, anything that could be taken as a slight. But complicated definitely can be. If somebody's saying that I'm a complicated person, I could take umbrage with that. Who knows if I would or not, but I could understand being a little bit upset with that. But if he is, in fact, a, quote, complicated fella, and you are in a very complicated situation, the last thing that I would do is call him a complicated fella publicly. That doesn't seem like it would possibly be a good idea when you're already in a bad spot. And just last week, you are saying, or in your Q&A during this past week, you're saying the less things that can be said publicly from either side in this situation, the better. That it doesn't make sense for either side to make any make any comments publicly. So why are you possibly making any sort of statement, ruffling any sort of waters in any way, shape, or form? Again, things are already in a bad spot. And I don't get what you have to gain in this situation. You're certainly not helping your situation with Aaron Rodgers. You're certainly not helping Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst in this situation. They've got to be just thinking, like, what are you doing? Like, just don't say anything. This isn't complicated. You are running a franchise. Your franchise is doing everything that you can to get Aaron Rodgers back in the door. And you're making any sort of statement whatsoever that could be taken or misconstrued in a variety of different ways. Do I ultimately think that this is going to affect the entirety of the situation? No. Whatever Aaron Rodgers was thinking before, whether it was going to be resolvable or not, this doesn't change that, right? This isn't an egregious enough error where Rodgers is going to be like, well, I was kind of weighing things, but now he called me, a complicated fella. I am out of there. I don't think that. But why even go that route? There's literally nothing to gain from this situation. Now, I just said, and I want to reiterate it here, I don't think that this ultimately changes that much. In the scheme of things, Rodgers isn't going to come back because he was called a complicated fellow. But it seems insanely tone deaf to say anything remotely like this when your franchise is trying everything in their power to get Aaron Rodgers back in the building. And I've been on record in the past of saying there are a million shades of gray here, right? This is a complex situation. I am sure there are things that Aaron Rodgers has done incorrectly. I am sure there are things that the Green Bay Packers have done incorrectly. I'm sure there have been breakdowns on communications from both sides. I'm sure ultimately one side is more to blame than the other. And I'm sure as more details and facts come out, that we will probably maybe have a better idea of where to ultimately place some of that blame. And I'm not absolving anyone in this situation. I'm not saying Aaron Rodgers is without blame. I'm not saying Brian Gutekunst, Russ Ball, any Matt LaFleur. I'm not absolving anyone at this point, just because, again, we don't know enough about the situation. However, I do tend to lean in the direction that ultimately, when all is said and done, when you are the president of the organization, it is your responsibility to make sure that these things don't happen, especially when you've been through a very similar situation in the past and should know how to deal with complicated situations like this. So I've gone through this before and said, listen, I understand Aaron Rodgers may be a complex individual, and he may have complex feelings as to how the organization should be run, of how he should be treated as a star quarterback, as how he should be treated as a star in the NFL and sports in general, and how the players on the team should be treated. That is a fair thing to want when you are in Aaron Rodgers' position. I can see that side of things. If you're Brian Gutekunst, I can see how you have been trained, again, and I've mentioned this before, from Ron Wolf to Ted Thompson to yourself, that you don't focus on the here and now or on one individual player. You look down the road. What is the best way to make the Packers the best team possible 3, 5, 8, 10 years from now? Not just this year, not just in 2021, not just for this upcoming season. You have to have a long-term approach. That has to be the general manager's approach to things. If you're Russ Ball, his job is to crunch the numbers and say, here are some things we can do, here are some things we should not do. He has a prerogative and a viewpoint on this based on what his job is in the organization. Matt LaFleur wants to say, hey, I want the best team possible to go out and coach this team. And, he may have some players that he wants to say goodbye to. He may want different players that he wants in there. He may, have different ways that he wants to run the organization than Aaron Rodgers or Brian Gutekunst or Russ Ball, etc. They all have their own individual viewpoints, and they all have their own individual jobs to do, whether that's Aaron Rodgers, Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst, Russ Ball. And all of them, in my opinion, are upholding their part of their job duties. Rodgers is the captain of the team, one of the foremost players in the NFL when it comes to fighting for players, when he, trying to have support for the players that are in that locker room. He is on the leadership committee. He is a star. He's literally the MVP of the league. And if he wants to move a situation forward or try to bring light to a situation, that's what he's going to do. Matt LaFleur has his own agenda. Brian Gutekunst is trying to build a team for both now and in the future. That's his prerogative. Russ Ball is trying to crunch the numbers and figure out how he can make all of this work. But at the end of the day, while all of those have siloed, individualistic goals to try to make sure that they're doing their individual jobs, it is the president's responsibility in this situation to make sure that all of those goals come together for a common cause and make sure the Packers are the best versions of themselves both now and in the future. That's his job. And in my opinion, with how these quotes keep coming out of his mouth and how this overall situation has been handled, I tend to lean that I don't harbor as much animosity for Aaron Rodgers. I don't harbor any animosity at this point for Brian Gutekunst. And I know there's somebody that comments every single day down in the comments, fire Gutekunst. I definitely don't agree with that. I don't harbor anything for Matt LaFleur. I think he's done a tremendous job. I think Russ Ball has been insanely creative in putting together contracts and situations that could make this Packers team work both now and in the future. Who does that leave? That, in my opinion, leaves Mark Murphy. His ultimate stamp on how this works out will be maybe large part is harsh, but it will be a significant part, a noteworthy part in his legacy as president of the Green Bay Packers. And I want to be upfront here and say that I have been for a long time of the belief that he has taken far too much criticism for how he's been, overseeing this team. This has been a very successful franchise since he has started, as president. This team has won a Super Bowl. They've consistently been relevant. They've completely redone the Titletown district. They've stayed financially in good standing throughout a pandemic, throughout a variety of different things. They've done a million things right. I mean, hiring, in my opinion, both Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur, Mark Murphy deserves a ton of credit for that. But there are times where he just says things or puts his foot in his mouth, or specifically with this Rodgers situation, that it's tough to overlook some of that stuff. And we are far from knowing the ultimate conclusion to this story. And maybe Rodgers comes back, and maybe they win a Super Bowl, and maybe Rodgers walks off into the sunset, and maybe they transition to Jordan Love, and he becomes the next great quarterback, and all of that will be under Mark Murphy's purview, and it'll all work out amazing. Maybe it doesn't. But either way, there are some serious question marks to be asked of how Mark Murphy has handled this situation. It takes the utmost of care to kind of get through this and tightrope this. From the moment they drafted Jordan Love, by the way, it took the utmost amount of care. And to me, how he has handled now in 3 different occasions, how he talked about it before we heard about Rodgers, how he talked about it in a Q&A, how he talked about in this situation a complicated fella, and even bringing up that this has divided Packers Nation to almost making it seem like, even though I full belief he didn't mean this, but making it seem like Rodgers was dividing Packer fans, when it was, I believe he meant the situation. But again, it just takes the utmost of care. And I don't think he has done a great job of handling this entire situation with the utmost of care. I think that's a vast understatement, in fact. And it's getting to the point where every time that Mark Murphy is doing one of these Q&As, or there's, he's at a function or he's got an open mic, you're reading his transcript like you would read your drunk texts from the night before, just being like, oh, just please let there not be anything regrettable. Just like scrolling through, like, please, nothing regrettable, please, nothing like, that's what it's like right now. And you just want it to be, okay. You just don't want anything. Like, don't say anything right now. Like, that should be your operating procedure. This is the Giannis Antetokounmpo version of not taking 3-pointers right now. Giannis, no threes. Mark Murphy, no comments. That's where we're at this very moment, and that's where it needs to be. So, again, I've been overall more pro Mark Murphy and how he's handled the entire franchise over the course of the last decade plus. But this is, frustrating, I think, is the right word for it. And it just takes more care. And I don't think he's handled that with the utmost amount of care. All right, the other quote I wanted to get to, and that is the Adam Schefter quote. This is from a few days ago. And he said, they know, and he's talking about the Packers, they know, this is a quote, they know that if he's not back, that they will be one of the worst teams in football, end quote. So he's talking about the Green Bay Packers here. Again, they know that if he's not back, meaning Aaron Rodgers, that they will be one of the worst teams in football. Now, this is super interesting, again, because I feel like Adam Schefter has always been like the Switzerland of, sports reporters, right? Not a good guy, not a bad guy, just like Switzerland in the middle, just reporting news. Like, no main agendas, not, pandering to any sort of audience. But with this Packers stuff, it's almost like he's WWE heel style, like Mike Florio, going full Mike Florio on the situation. And trying to figure out how he can get people riled up, which is so anti-Adam Schefter. So, I don't know. It just seems really, really weird because, first of all, Adam, as amazing of a reporter as you are, first of all, the terms of your initial breaking of this story were interesting at best, and I sided mostly with Schefter the previous time before that. But to go in and say the Packers are going to be one of the worst teams in football, listen, this could go bad for Green Bay, all right? It really could. And especially if something happens with Rodgers and he's not back, and and there's this undercurrent of all the drama this offseason, and maybe Love's not quite ready, but they make him the starter. Yes, I think this team could be maybe in like a 7-10 sort of role, right? I think that's more likely around what it is. Maybe it's a little bit worse than that, but I think that's what it is. But this is a team that has a phenomenal head coach, that has talent at every single position, young talent at almost every single position on this roster. It has players who are ready to take the next step. It has bona fide studs in Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams. Tunyon's coming along. David Bakhtiari will be back. Elton Jenkins. You've got, A.J. Dillon up and coming on defense. Rashawn Gary's ready to turn a corner. Za'Darius Smith, Preston Smith, Kenny Clark. At corner, you've got Jair Alexander, first-round pick Eric Stokes. You've got Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage. Like, this is not a team that is lacking in talent. And we have seen Mitch Trubisky-led Chicago Bears in the playoffs. We have seen Blake Bortles-led Jacksonville Jaguars in the AFC Championship, almost should have beat the New England Patriots with Tom Brady at quarterback. Like, there are far worse teams who have made far deeper runs into the playoffs than this Packers team would be with either Blake Bortles or Jordan Love. I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm not saying it will happen, but people are way underestimating the overall talent on this Packers team. So, yes, I do believe that there could be some complications with this season based on everything that's happened, whether Rodgers is back or not. I think that, everything has to work perfectly together for you to make a Super Bowl run and be sort of that Cinderella team. This certainly doesn't feel like how a Cinderella season starts, right? There is enough drama in Green Bay to fill up a handful of seasons worth. And to be fair, Green Bay has had almost none since Matt LaFleur started. No adversity, no drama for 2 seasons straight. They had to manufacture stuff by saying that there wasn't, Rodgers couldn't call audibles, which wasn't true, or that Rodgers and Matt LaFleur weren't going to get along, which wasn't true. Now there's drama. Now there's, adversity. And it'll be interesting to see how everything happens. But Adam Schefter, there is zero chance that this is one of the worst teams in football. Like, worst teams are like 2-win, 3-win teams. No matter what happens, I will guarantee you the Packers are not a 2, 3, 4-win team. Maybe it goes bad. Maybe they win 5 or 6 games only. But they're not going to be one of the worst teams, in my opinion. You might say, well, if they win 5 or 6 games, it's basically one of the worst teams. Whatever. Maybe it's semantics, but in my opinion, this is not going to be a team that's drafting in the top 5 next year, regardless of what happens. It will not be a bottom 5 team in the NFL, which would, in my opinion, be one of the worst teams in the NFL. Don't think they'll even be a bottom 8 team in the NFL, regardless of what happens. And I think Green Bay will be competitive regardless of what happens. And I don't think the NFC North is that great. I'm not scared of the Vikings, Bears, Lions, even if it's Jordan Love at quarterback. Bring them the heck on. I'm ready to see Green Bay take on those teams and try to win a division, even with Jordan Love, even with Blake Bortles, even with Kirk Benkert, even with, it doesn't even matter. They are going to go out and compete. I really believe that. So, yeah. And I know, Aaron Nagler did a really good video about this and saying that, listen, you have to take the comments with a grain of salt because Adam Schefter is, probably speaking on behalf of David Dunn, who is Aaron Rodgers' agent, which makes sense. And I don't disagree with that. But the weird thing is that David Dunn is Jordan Love's agent too. Like, if David Dunn wants it out there that this team's going to be the worst team ever because, Jordan Love's going to be the quarterback, well, that's not exactly complimentary of your other client and Jordan Love. So the whole thing is so weird and it's so hyperbolic and it's so, to me, unlike Adam Schefter. There's a million things that could happen, but I don't believe that Green Bay is going to be one of the, quote, worst teams in football. By the way, their Twitter, got it wrong. It's spelled worst, W-O-R-S-E, not W-O-R-S-T. So just get your stuff together, ESPN. Anywho, that's going to do it for me on this version of the Pack-A-Day podcast. I appreciate you all listening as always. I'll be right back here tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.